My final guest is the entrepreneur and economist John Mills. He's also the founder of the Institute for Prosperity, and he is an acclaimed author. He's just published Why the West is Failing, Failed Economics and the Rise of the East, in which he castigates traditional economics and the teaching of it. He calls for less emphasis on inflation and much more on growth, entrepreneurialism and wealth creation. Intriguingly, he wrote it before Liz Truss became the leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister. And I'm delighted to say, as I did, that he's sitting here next to me. Your first premise, I found, having wrestled with economics as an undergraduate in the early 1970s, the economic theory is failing, but also the way in which we teach it to our bright young men and women is also failing. When did that penny drop for John Mills?
Well, I think over the last few years, I think we've been keeping inflation down to 2% as our main goal. But the trouble with this is that then pushes the pound up. It makes it more difficult to invest in this country. The growth rate slows up, living standards stagnate, and the economy doesn't grow. And that seems to me to be a very bad outcome.
Yeah.
I think it's much more important to concentrate on getting investment up, getting more manufacturing back, which is where productivity increases are much easier to find than they are in the services, and getting the economy onto a growth trajectory which is sustainable.
It's an argument I agree with, but also, as always with you, it is brilliantly spelt out with lots of data and stats. It's not just John Mills rambling and thinking about some bright new idea. There is data there to fulfil it. But I said what I did in my introduction, John, to our conversation, was that it was almost as if Liz Truss had read that book before becoming leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister. I mean, even to the point of that phrase, throwing out the Treasury orthodoxy. That could be throwing out the economic orthodoxy. Do you approve of what she's trying to do?
Well, I approve of trying to get the growth rate up. I think that's really, really important, not least because I think we've got some very heavy costs coming down the track on climate change, on healthcare, on social care, on training, on ageing population, on more military expenditure. If we're not very careful, we're going to see living standards going down rather than going up. So I'm completely in agreement with her that what we need is more economic growth. Where I don't think I agree with her is that I don't think what she's doing at the moment to try and get the growth rate up is really going to work. It's not going to increase the amount of investment which you need, which is the really crucial metric for getting the growth rate up.
That's interesting, partly because I was saying it in the earlier conversations that people, I mean, who in the past you've profoundly disagreed with on certain other matters, like Dan Hammond, Tory Brexiteer in the House of Lords, but also the Institute of Economic Affairs, saying unless you have the supply side stuff, the growth, the entrepreneurialism, the zest for business alongside the tax changes, it won't work. You're on the same hymn sheet on that point.
Well, I am up to a point. I think that all these supply-side things on getting patient capital, more infrastructure investment, R&D, I think these are all really, really important. But unless you get the right framework for demand going up as well, it just won't work. And I think the danger that we're in at the moment is that we've got a huge balance of payments problem. It's really not worth investing in manufacturing in this country because it's too expensive to get things made here compared to elsewhere, because the exchange rate's very high. Unless that's altered, we're never going to get the growth rate up to any sort of reasonable level. And we're going to slip further and further back in world terms, which is what's happening.
Is that an argument, subtle though it may well be, to review the independence of the Bank of England? Because if you want to impact directly on the exchange rate and via interest rates, then Her Majesty's government's got to be able to do it. At the moment, the bank is dealing with inflation, which you say is overdone in the book, but you can't impact on the exchange rate directly unless you control interest rates.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, I think we need a much more coordinated approach with the government and the Bank of England pulling in the same direction. Clearly, one of the big problems at the moment is they're pulling in opposite directions. I understand why people want to get the pound back up again with higher interest rates to stabilise the markets. The problem is this compromises our long-term future. But what you need is a coordinated approach where both the fiscal policy, the exchange rate policy, and the monetary policy are all pulling in the same directions. And that's really what we've been missing.
We're under the same roof, i.e. the Treasury.
Well, somebody's got to be in charge to make sure they're all pulling in the same direction.
Final point, and it's the second half of the title of this brilliant book, which you've got there in front of me, Why the West is Failing. To me, the standout quote within the book was, and I think I do quote, "We beat Russia in the Cold War, but China is now beating us all in the economic war of the 21st century." That's not just money, bricks, mortar and production. That's ideology as well.
I think that's right. I mean, I think we're in real danger if the social democracy can't produce reasonable living standards, reasonable rates of economic growth, but the authoritarian governments in the East can. I think that's going to put social democracy under real pressure over the coming years. That's a real danger.
Actually, you also say another important point within it is that you can have a vibrant economy, and we all desperately need a vibrant economy, but you've also got to have the rule of law and social responsibility. And that would be a complete anathema in Beijing.
I think that's right. If you're going to have a good life, you need a combination of a vibrant economy that's growing, and you need all these supply-side elements, the rule of law and all that kind of thing, equally important.
You optimistic?
Not very optimistic, because I think we're not going to adopt the sort of policies I think should be implemented. And I think we're going to drift down over the coming period into a period where living standards slip downwards rather than go upwards. And I think that's a really bad outlook, one which we really ought to avoid if we possibly can.
I would subscribe to every letter, jot, comma and syllable within that analysis. John, it's always great to see you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. John Mills there. And it is a terrific book to read. You should dig it out and enjoy it.